Notice and warning to utility companies. Notice and warning to all utility companies for embezzlement, theft by deception and extortion failing to discharge all debts pursuant to 73rd Congress. Sess 1. CHS 4849. June 5, 6. 1933 HJR 192 HR 1491 Public Law 148 Stat 1 Public Law 10 Chapter 48 Stat 112 Public Law 73 1040 Stat 411 Trading with the Enemy ACT TWI OCT 6. 1917 but not limited to, since House Joint Resolution 192, HJR 192, Public Law 7310, was passed in 1933 we have only had debt, because all property and gold was seized by the government as collateral in the bankruptcy of the United States. In 1863 the first Bank Act was passed. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or OCC, is a U.S. federal agency established by the National Currency Act of 1863 and serves to charter, regulate, and supervise all national banks and the federal branches and agencies of foreign banks in the United States. The OCC was created by Abraham Lincoln to fund the American Civil War but was later transformed into a regulatory agency to instill confidence in the national banking system and protect consumers from misleading business practices. The Lieber Code, or General Order 100, was also created by Abraham Lincoln in 1863. The National Bank Act, Chapter 58, 12 Stat 665, February 25, 1863. Was a United States federal law that established a system of national charters for banks, the United States national banks. It encouraged development of a national currency based on bank holdings of U.S. Treasury securities, the so-called national bank notes. It also established the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency OCC as part of the Department of the Treasury. This was to establish a national security holding body for the existence of the monetary policy of the state. The Act, together with Abraham Lincoln's issuance of greenbacks, raised money for the federal government in the American Civil War by enticing banks to buy federal bonds and taxing state bank-issued currency out of existence. The law proved defective and was replaced by the National Bank Act of 1864. The money was used to fund the Union Army in the fight against the Confederacy. This authorized the OCC to examine and regulate nationally chartered banks. Notice and warning to utility companies 1 of August 3, 11, 2016. Notice and warning to utility companies. The above only partially begins to include the historical records and other acts of Congress that proves the U.S. bankruptcy of 1933 and that there is no money, only credit, that the American people are the creditors. All utilities companies knowingly have been sending their customers dividends but, in fact, making each recipient believe that dividend was an invoice for services provided by the utilities companies. The utilities companies have mailed through the U.S. mail an intentional misrepresentation of facts, unfair business practices, and each utility company and agents thereof have knowingly with forethought and malice created a fraudulent debt, defrauding the creditor, that is the recipient of said dividends, that the utilities companies lead the recipient to believe through deception is an invoice. The utilities companies in turn then extract through extortionate measures payment from the customers instead of the utilities companies informing those same recipients that this dividend is in actuality payment to the recipient as a charged-off debt pursuant to the incorporated in entirety documented evidence provided herein. All utility companies have thus created a convertible and fraudulent debt. See analysis of a country embezzled. All utilities companies have failed to pay off any of the public debt but rather unlawfully redirected ill-gotten gains into private corporate accounts through embezzlement, theft by deception, fraudulent conversion, and in violation to each all incorporated in entirety laws established through and as a result of the U.S. bankruptcy of 1933, wherein there is no money, only bank notes which are but only a promise to pay. Thus all debts are to be discharged as agreed, but the utilities companies and banks, through their greed, have not discharged any debt, fraudulently making the utility customer deeper in debt by utilities companies' use of bank notes or promissory notes that the utilities companies add to the public debt side of the books rather than discharging the debts as stipulated in public laws, House resolutions, and House joint resolutions. Additionally, the alleged invoices sent to every recipient is a dividend and or a coupon to the recipient. The utilities companies all know this to be a fact. The Comptroller of the Currency also knows all of the above to be irrefutable facts. but is acting as a money laundering agency by for through the privately owned Federal Reserve, in Houston, Texas, et al. The comptroller of the currency at county, state, and federal level all know the incorporated documents and testimony to be true, but have yet to discharge any of the public debt, therefore have misappropriated funds through embezzlement, theft by deception, obtaining money through false pretenses, extortion and other predicate acts since the date of comptroller of the currency inception of 1863. All utility companies, which are private for-profit corporations, regardless of location, are knowingly participating in the fraud and Ponzi scheme with the intent to fraudulently convert this notice and warning to utility companies 2 of August 3, 2016. Notice and warning to utility companies, and every other country's wealth into private industry accounts by fraudulent conveyance, embezzlement, theft by deception, creating fraudulent debts, Ponzi scheme and fraud through the U.S. mail. Just for starters, every judge and every attorney in America, especially those who hold positions with several direct connections into the utilities companies' bank accounts and acting as attorneys for the banks, most presumably in all other countries as well, since they all get their instructions from England, the same place that all the banks get their instructions through the comptroller of the currency headquarters in London, England, each knowing the above and incorporated to be true, since they are well versed on the U.S. bankruptcy of 1933 and that America still remains to date in a state of emergency and operates under English law, though that also is supposed to be a well-kept secret. This means there is no money. It further means that since there is no money, American signatures are used as the credit to run this country. That in turn means that it is the American people whom are the creditors, not the debtors, as the banks and utilities companies would like everyone to believe. The utilities companies have been operating with this knowledge with intent, forethought and malice to commit the crimes mentioned herein but not limited to. Due to the facts incorporated herein in entirety, all debts are to be charged off, including but not limited to every alleged utilities invoice, which each all have actually been a dividend, for which every utilities company embezzled payment through fraud, using extortion and other threats to discontinue service if payment is not made. These alleged invoices were dividends that every utilities company using deceptive business practice lead the public to believe were debts owed, when it is a fact that it is the utilities companies who owe the American public all those fraudulently received ill-gotten gains plus the interest.